If you walk the streets of Hanau in the 1990s, this one is for you. The market square is still there. The Brothers Grimm still stand on it in bronze, exactly where you left them. But something you knew is gone now, completely gone, and where it stood today, there are families living who have never heard of it. Stay with us because that part is going to catch you off guard.
Hi everyone, Isabella here. Picture a small German city on a river, 25 miles east of Frankfurt, where a stork and fairy tale charm sits on top of a hard modern history. That is Hanau, and it has a face most visitors never learn to read.
Leo here, and I will say the part out loud. A whole generation of Americans called this place home. For a lot of people watching, Hanau was not a vacation. It was an address, a duty station, a first apartment off post.
I'm Michael, so here is how we are going to do this. We walk the city the way you would on a return trip, starting right at the market square, the spot every former resident pictures first. First the thing still standing, then the thing that vanished, and we will be honest about both. That square, the town hall, the Brothers Grimms, that is our anchor for the whole trip.
And we hold two ideas at once the whole way. What changed and what is exactly as you left it. The heritage endured. The garrison did not. Both are true and both deserve to be said plainly. Isabella, you have been reading the messages people send about this town. There is one that keeps coming up, the one everyone asks first. Put it to the room.
Yes, and it is always the same shape. People write, I was stationed in Hanau in the 90s. Is anything I remember still there? So that is our whole question today. Is anything you remember still there?
That is the spine of this whole trip, so let's answer it together. First, let's get our bearings, because the geography is the one thing your memory never lost. Let's get our bearings first, because geography is the thing your memory keeps even when the buildings change. Close your eyes and you can probably still place yourself on the map.
So let me put it on an actual map, because that orients everyone the same way. Here is Frankfurt am Main, the skyline, the airport, the river. Now slide your eye east about 25 miles. Hanau sits right there at the gates of Frankfurt. Close enough to commute, far enough to be its own place with its own accent and its own history.
And here is Hanau itself. It sits on the River Main, right where a smaller river called the Kinzig flows into it. Water was the whole reason a town grew here in the first place.
About 101,000 people live there now, which makes it the 6th largest city in the state of Hesse, not a village. A real working city with a real downtown.
And the Main is a working river, the kind with barges and a real port, not a postcard creek. If you ever stood on the bank and watched the water go by, that water is still going by.
I love that the river outlasts everything. Empires, armies, you name it. The Main was here before any of us, and it will be here after. That is the quiet anchor of this whole story.
And it all connects through the Autobahn and the main station, the Hauptbahnhof. If you ever caught a train to Frankfurt or rode the Bahn to somewhere on a weekend pass, that hub is how the region hangs together.
So that is the where. A river city at the edge of Frankfurt. Now let's talk about the name this town is famous for all over the world, and it is not a general's name. Real quick, because this next part matters to you. If any of this is helping, tap that like button, then hit subscribe and ring the bell so the next one finds you. Both are free and take about a second, but they tell the algorithm to show this to one more person who needs it.
Here is the thing the whole world knows Hanau for, even people who could never find it on a map. This is where the Brothers Grimm were born. Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, Rapunzel. All of it traces back to two brothers from this town. Let me show you their faces, because they are not who people picture. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, painted in 1855. Two serious scholars, not two cartoon storytellers.
And the dates are tight, Isabella. Jacob was born here in 1785, Wilhelm the year after, in 1786. They grew up nearby in Steino, but Hanau is the birthplace and Hanau has never once let the world forget it.
And here is the part people get wrong. The Grimms did not sit down and make up these stories, they were scholars. They went out and collected tales that ordinary people had been telling for generations, and they wrote them down before they disappeared.
So the fairy tale you grew up with, the wolf, the red hood, the basket for grandmother, that is a tale the Grimms rescued and the world kept. The brand of this whole town is built on stories that were almost lost.
And if you lived there, you knew exactly where they stand. On the market square in bronze in front of the old town hall, Wilhelm seated with a book, Jacob standing beside him. You walked past them 100 times.
That monument was unveiled in 1896, and here is what matters for you. It survived. The war came, the city burned, and the Brothers Grimm are still standing on that square today in the same spot.
And that monument is not just a statue, it is a mile marker. Hanau is the official start of the German fairy tale route, 600 kilometers of road that runs all the way north to Bremen.
Let me run the whole timeline of this town on the board, because the Grimms are one chapter in a much longer story, and seeing it laid out is the only way the pieces line up. Start at 1597, the founding of the Neustadt by refugee goldsmiths. Then the Grimms born in the 1780s. Then the catastrophe, 1945. Then the American decades. Then today.
Look at that shape. Refugees, scholars, fire, soldiers, and a fresh start. Every one of those chapters is still written into the streets if you know where to look. Cynthia, this is where it gets personal.
Now the part this video is really for. If Hanau was your home in the 90s, there is a very good chance you did not choose it. The Army sent you there because for 63 years, Hanau was one of the largest American military communities in all of Europe. Tens of thousands of soldiers and families lived their whole German chapter right here.
At its peak, the Hanau Military Community ran to about 45,000 people. Soldiers, the civilians who worked alongside them, and the families. That is a mid-sized American city dropped into Germany.
And it was not one base, it was a constellation of them. Say the names out loud and watch who lights up. Pioneer Kaserne, Fliegerhorst, the Army Airfield, Hutier, Argonner, Yorkhof, Grossauheim.
If you served there, one of those names just hit you in the chest. That was where you reported, where you pulled duty, where your kids caught the bus. The PX, the commissary, the on-post school, a whole world.
And there was a reason it was so big, a Cold War reason. Hanau sat just behind the Fulda Gap, the stretch of country everyone expected Soviet tanks to pour through if the Cold War ever went hot. Hanau was the wall behind the door.
The headline unit for a lot of the era was the Engineers. The 130th Engineer Brigade was headquartered at Pioneer Kaserne from 1969. The 3rd Armored Division, Spearhead, was the armored presence until it stood down in '92.
This is exactly where memory and the record can drift apart, and I do not want us to wing it. So let me bring in someone who has spent years inside Hanau's history. Isabella, can we get our historian on the line?
Calling her now. Greta, are you with us?
I am here, glad to join you, and you are right to be careful, because the dates get muddled online. This community closed on a specific day.
Greta, give us the day. When did the American chapter in Hanau actually end?
There was a farewell ceremony on the 18th of April, 2008, that closed 63 years of American presence, going back to 1945.
And to be precise, this was not the domestic base closing process people sometimes call it. This was the Army repositioning in Europe, consolidating the force toward places like Grafenwohr. Hanau was on the wrong side of that math.
Exactly so. The Cold War standoff that built Hanau ended, so the footprint was handed back. The engineers had already cased their colors at Pioneer the year before, in 2007.
Greta, one last thing before we let you go. What happens to a place that was somebody's whole world after that world packs up and leaves?
It gets quiet, and then Germany decides what comes next. In Hanau's case, what comes next is genuinely hopeful, which is not always how these stories end. Thanks for having me on, and a salute to everyone who served there.
Thank you, Greta. So let's show them. The world packed up, and here's what grew back in its place.
So here is the answer to that hard question, and it is the part that will surprise a former resident the most. The bases did not just sit there rusting behind a fence. Germany turned them into neighborhoods. Take Pioneer Kaserne, the engineer headquarters, the heart of it. That ground, about 50 hectares of it, is being rebuilt into a brand new residential district. The Germans call it Pioneer Park.
And the numbers are real, not a brochure dream. The plan is for roughly 1,600 new homes, housing up to about 5,000 people. A small town, growing on the exact ground where the brigade used to form up.
Sit with that image for a second. A child is going to grow up in an apartment, riding a bike down a street, with no idea that her front yard was once a motor pool. The memory is yours. The ground moved on.
Germany even has a word for this, conversion, conversion, taking the land an army left behind and turning it back into ordinary life. Housing, parks, schools. It is the closest thing to swords into plowshares you will ever see on a city map.
And that is the bittersweet center of this whole homecoming. If you drove back tomorrow looking for your old barracks, you might not find it. But what replaced it is not a ruin, it is families. It is a future.
Now walk a few minutes off that ground and the feeling flips completely. Because the old town center, the part that is not a base, looks and sounds the way Germany always did.
Cobblestones, a cafe spilling onto the street, a bakery on the corner. If you ever spent a weekend just wandering, this is the Hanau that never left. The base changed. The town kept its heartbeat.
Leo, you have had your hand up since the motorpool line, and I think you are asking what everybody who served here is asking. Go ahead.
Yes, and it is the practical one. If you go back, is there anything left of the base era to actually see, or is every trace of it gone now?
Some traces remain, honestly. A few buildings get reused, street names linger, and the city marks the conversion sites. But the short answer is that you go back for the town and the memory, not for an intact base. The base is becoming homes.
Let's spend a few minutes on the things that did not move, because a former resident needs this reassurance. The grand old landmarks of Hanau are right where you left them, and they are worth a slow walk together.
Start with the crown jewel Schloss Philippsruhe, a full Baroque palace on the edge of town, built from 1701 as a count's summer residence on the French model. If you ever took photos by that fountain, the palace is still there.
And it is not a velvet rope museum you look at from outside. Philippsruhe houses the Historical Museum of Hanau. You can walk in, the same as you could then. The building did its job and kept doing it.
Then there is Wilhelmsbad, the old spa park on the other side of town, built in the 1770s, and here is my favorite detail. Its carousel, finished in 1780, is considered the oldest surviving carousel in the world.
Hold on, the oldest in the world right here in Hanau?
The oldest we know of, finished 1780, which is older than the United States is as a country. A wooden carousel, quietly turning at the edge of Hanau, older than the nation a lot of you served. So let that land, Cynthia.
Now the one that explains the town's whole character, the German Goldsmiths House on the Old Town Market. The building itself dates to 1537, the Old Town Hall, all red and white timber.
And why goldsmiths? Because when refugees founded the Neustadt in 1597, a lot of them were goldsmiths and silversmiths fleeing persecution. They brought a craft, and Hanau became a jewelry town for centuries.
That is the thread nobody outside the town knows. The precious metals giant Heraeus was born here in 1851, out of a little pharmacy, and it grew into a world leader in melting platinum. So the fairy tale town is also a metals town.
So which of these would you send a returning resident to first? I would say the palace, because it is the easiest to just walk back into and feel time collapse.
I would send them to the Goldsmiths House instead, Leo, because it explains the soul of the place in one building. But honestly, you cannot lose. Every one of them survived, and every one is still open.
And that is the takeaway. The palaces, the carousel, the goldsmiths, the monument, the heritage of Hanau did not just survive the century. It is still doing its job, still open, still yours to revisit. That is the half of the story that endures. Let's bring it home to the square at the center of it all. If there is one place that says you are back, it is the market square. The town hall, the market stalls, the Grimms in bronze. This is the heart, and it still beats.
And even the everyday places hold. Take the Hauptbahnhof, the main station, never glamorous, but if you ever stood on that plain forecourt waiting for a train, that exact ordinary spot is still there waiting too.
But honesty is part of love, so we name the hard things too, with respect. This town carries deep scars, and a homecoming that skips them is not a real one.
The reason so little of the medieval old town survives is brutal and simple. On the night of the 18th into the 19th of March 1945, an air raid created a firestorm that destroyed around 87% of Hanau.
Almost the whole old town, gone in a night. What you walked through in the 90s was a city that had rebuilt itself from ash. That is why the surviving pieces, the monument, the palaces, matter so much. They are the survivors.
And there is a more recent wound the town carries with great care. On the 19th of February 2020, a racist extremist murdered 9 people in Hanau. The city has been clear about what it was, and it honors those 9 every year.
We name that plainly and we hold it gently because the people of Hanau do. A town is not only its monuments, it is also how it remembers its losses, and Hanau remembers with dignity.
So here is the whole homecoming in one breath. The bases are gone, turned into homes. The scars are real and held with care. And the heart of the place, the Grimms and the river and the square, every bit of that is still there for you.
If you carry one thing out of this, make it this. Hanau changed, the way you changed, but it kept the things worth keeping, and it did not forget you. Go back, even just on a screen. The Brothers Grimm are holding your spot. So that is Hanau then and now. A fairy tale town on the Main that was also, for 63 years, an American home. The bases are gone and rebuilt into neighborhoods, but the Grimms, the palaces, and the market square are exactly where you left them.
And here is what you can do tonight. If you served there, pull up a map of Hanau, find your old Kaserne, and see for yourself what stands on that ground today. Your Hanau was real, and the part worth keeping is still there.
Here is the one thing that will pull you into our next walk. The next town we visit hides an entire vanished world under an ordinary skyline. And wait until you see what is buried beneath it.
If a place you once lived deserves a homecoming like this, subscribe and hit like because it genuinely tells us which town to walk next. And before we go, the one only you can answer. If you lived in Hanau, which Kasernes was yours, and what is the first place you would walk back to? Tell us in the comments.
The details in this one matter, so keep the recap handy.
This is Cynthia. Thanks for watching and signing off.